Something other than a Garmin or a Wahoo head unit has been on the front of my bike this week, and today we're looking into the Bryton Rider 450 cycling GPS. If you've looked really closely at the front of a Deceuninck Quickstep Rider bike, you will see a Bryton head unit on the front there. So these have been leading the pack, so to speak, in the World Tour to date. I've had the 450 for over a week now on the front of the bike, checking its ins and outs. I've also ridden with the Rider 530 in the past. I did one ride and chose really not to continue on with this for reasons which may be obvious later in the video. Over on the Bryton website, the 450 is marketed as a mountain bike specific or mountain bike focused head unit. There's nothing really mountain bike about this, except its full support for the global navigational systems such as GPS, GLONASS, Baidu out of China, Galileo, and QZSS out of Japan. So wherever you take this in line of sight of the sky, it's pretty much guaranteed to track you pretty accurately. Okay, the actual spec sheets though, and on paper here, it's a 2.3-inch monochrome non-touch screen, so it's all button operated. It does have a backlight, which can be set to auto, time-based, or never. The mount compatibility, Garmin compatible. Big thumbs up there for that. Sensor support, ANT+ and Bluetooth. The unit connectivity and sync is over Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. Up to 5 data pages plus altitude page, follow track page or map page, and 2 lap pages. And in any of the data pages, there's up to 10 configuration fields that you can have on the screen at any one time. Configuration can be done on the unit or via the mobile app with the settings and the data screens. There's lots of language support up here. 2 bike profiles, the calls and messages and email notifications can come through to your head unit. They are very basic for what's shown on screen. 78 functions and fields, speed, time, distance, cadence, lap, altitude, power, temperature, gears, calorie, the whole sort of swag of things you can display on screen. It does have auto pause, start and stop. It does have time, distance, speed, and cadence alerts. There is a smart lap, so an auto lap based on distance or time. Record mode, smart or 1 second. Internal storage, 3.7 gig. I have around 1.5 gig free on this unit with the US maps and the Australian and Oceania maps on here. So there's still a bit of space for fit files to be stored and activities. Storage expansion, nope. Battery life claimed, maximum 32 hours. And that's a big thing for this unit is the battery life. I've claimed 32 hours. Charging type, micro USB on the bottom, and you can use it whilst in charge. So there's the spec sheet of the unit. Now on paper it looks pretty good, and that's usually covers what people are after. However, there's more to it than that. So diving a little deeper into the functionality of the 450, activity upload sync is to Bryton Active, their own website or cloud service, Strava, Training Peaks, and Self Loops. The route import can be done via the Bryton app using their route creator, Strava, Komoot, or you can do a file import via the mobile app. The mapping on the unit is OpenStreetMaps, which is regional. I'm not sure how they update the maps. I couldn't find in the manual how to load different maps for different regions of the world. When I was handed this from Bryton over at Sea Otter, it had the US maps on there, and they said, oh, do you want us to load the Australian maps? I said, yes, the Australian maps are on there. I'm not quite sure the process of how to do that as a user. Couldn't find it in the manual, couldn't find it on the website. Bryton, you might want to update the details on that or just point me in the right direction. I couldn't find it, but you can load other maps on here. Turn-by-turn navigation and display cues are very similar to that of the Element and Element Bolt. The unit has no smarts to do routing on the head unit itself. It needs a cue to read to show you where to go. So if you were to create a route with the Bryton app or Komoot, I believe, or Ride with GPS, it should be able to read those cues back to you. My routes that I tested this week were created with the Bryton app, and it did give me the turn cues. It didn't give me any notifications or warnings, just turn here on the top of the screen. That was pretty basic, but they did appear. Other than that, it gives you breadcrumb trail, and there's no rerouting. It just gives you an off-route warning if you are off-route. So very similar to that of the Element and Element Bolt. No FEC training control, no ANT+ Light network support, no radar support, so no Vario radar support. It does have Di2 and ETAP electronic gear support, so it will show you the gears and will show you your Di2 battery level, which is something that I do like to have on the screen. Also support for D-Fly custom button support, so if you reprogram any of the buttons to switch screens, start lap, change screens, etc., that's all can be done on this unit. Structured workouts are supported if you create them within the app and then sync them down to the unit. No Strava live segments. Advanced pedal metrics are there, kind of. It gives you torque effectiveness and pedal smoothness if your power meter is paired up, and gives you left and right, but no cycling dynamics. So none of the additional features there for that standard. No online live tracking, no group tracking, and it does use TSS, IF, and NP metrics from Training Peaks if you want those on the screen too. Functionality-wise, I'd have to say the 450 probably comes in about half that of the Wahoo and Garmin offerings on the market today. Now that's including all the spec sheets plus other connected services such as sync sites, route syncs, workout syncs, and online tracking. But to put that in perspective, the unit comes in at around half the price of the top end offerings from Garmin and Wahoo too. The 450 comes in at 270 Australian dollars at around 199 US. So we could call the unit pretty cheap. Now for me, my use cases are a little different for head units and my usage of them, particularly zero offsetting power meters after the first 10 minutes outside riding, first 10 minutes inside of a riding, and accessing things like the saved fit file on these units straight away after my ride. I want to be able to jump on there, grab the file straight away and throw it through an analysis tool to see how it's all gone. So my use case is a little different to everyone else. Let's go through the pros and cons that I've come up against this week. So the core functionality, no worries at all. The GPS tracking on this was super. Anything flying in the sky, this thing can pretty much connect to it and track where you've been. The sensor recording was no problems at all. The heart rate monitors, the power meters that I connected to this seemed to record just fine on here. And the information display, it was fully customizable and I could display what I wanted on screen. As just mentioned, the unit is relatively cheap or cost efficient, I think I'd call it, but it's really not a one-for-one comparison given those spec sheets and the service offering are quite different on this. And battery life, 32 hours is phenomenal compared to what's out there at the moment. The recently released Wahoo Roam, 17 hours claimed, and the new Garmin's are around 20 hours. So for this unit to have 32 maximum claimed, that's a bit of a head start right there. Okay, with the pros out of the way, it's on to the cons. And the cons is a pretty extensive list after a week of getting my head around how this actually works. So let's get stuck straight into it. First of all, the screen is inset by about 2 or 3 millimeters, which then casts a shadow on the data on the screen, which makes it hard to read, depending on where the sun angle is. At the moment, it's winter here in Australia, or coming into winter, the sun's quite low, so it's casting shadows on the screen. And with that shiny screen, it can be hard to read. The contrast isn't turned up enough, so the screen does appear faded if there's direct sunlight on here. And the fonts used, not to my liking, but that's each to their own on the fonts. And over to the activity recording lockout is what I call it. Now this was difficult to understand, difficult to get my head around, and I do not agree with this. This will not be on the front of my bike again until this one is fixed. And what I mean by the activity lockout is that once an activity has started, you are locked out from the unit. You cannot get to the menus. So if I've started an activity and I want to zero offset my power meter, which is something I do quite often, I can't do it. I need to stop the activity, save the activity into a fit file, then go through the menus to set the offset, and then start a new activity. That's unacceptable. That's a use case that I cannot actually live with at all. I need to be able to reset my power meters, zero offset them during a ride, indoors and out, and continue on. Next up is the navigation. I can't start to follow track or start a navigation once I've started an activity. So if I'm riding 2 or 3 kilometers to the start of a ride and then I want to follow a track, you've got to stop the activity, save the fit file, start it up, follow the track. And then when I got to the end of my ride, it said I'd arrived, fantastic, but then it didn't flip to standard mode. It kept me in routing mode. And then for the rest of my ride, for the next 10 kilometers as I was riding home, it told me I had arrived, but I was off route. That's just a use case, that's a simple use case that should be fixed. I don't see why it couldn't tell me that I'd done the route and then went. Anyhow, that aside, that's something I've got a list of things to fix later on. The map zooming is very, very delayed, indicating the processing on this device is very limited. So zooming in and zooming out is very, very sluggish with the maps on screen. If you were coming up to an intersection, you wanted to zoom, it takes a while. The system navigation can be sluggish on screen, so I ended up double pressing things a few times because the system just appeared to be laggy. And all it takes to stop a ride is a double press of this button here. So pause, stop, and then done. There's no confirmation to save an activity. As you've seen on Garmin units, if you're familiar with those, and Wahoo units, it really just double checks. Hey, are you really sure you want to stop this activity? Yes, no, or you can go back to it. This, it's just like double tap and done. And as I was figuring my way around the menus, I'd lost kilometers and kilometers trying to get my head around this. And on today's ride, which was just a 50 kilometer just riding along, I had the route planned in my head, but not on the head units. There was no map screen available for me, so I couldn't scroll through the map. And because of that activity lockout, I couldn't go through and check the settings to bring the map up on the screen. So again, just another use case that I couldn't get my head around that appeared to be quite buggy. And finally, trying to analyze the fit files on here through the DC analyzer and other GPS tracking sites, it wasn't possible. The way it writes the fit files is a little different to the standard, I think. I've had someone look into this for me and they say, look, it is setting the developer fields on here saying there is developer fields, but not putting the developer fields in the fit file. which causes other sites to balk out. So unfortunately today, I'm not going to be able to give you an overlay of data or GPS track up against other units I was using at the time because something's up with the 450. Having said that, uploading the files to Strava with this head unit, the data appeared to be okay. So it did give me power, speed, cadence, heart rate, temperature, and all that. Didn't appear to be any dropout, so it recorded the data okay. I just wasn't able to use my standard tools to analyze this data and compare it to others. Bit of a disappointment there. So for me, the Rider 450 really feels like an old Edge 500 unit, maybe with a few enhancements to the Bluetooth connectivity, the battery life, and syncing partners and things like that, but there really isn't much more to it. And a bit of a letdown as a 2019 device. Now, having said that, this unit isn't a 2019 device. It was brought out last year, over a year ago, and it's almost identical to the Rider 530. If you've seen the Rider 530 menu system, or even the giant Neos track, which is just a reskinned, rebranded Bryton unit, which was brought out last year. So there's a few years gone into these units with a similar operating system and similar menus. It just doesn't hit the mark. Having said all that, winding back, if you're after the core functionality such as one-time setup, core features and functions, and upload to Strava, and a killer battery life at an okay price, sure, that will do it. But expecting this to be of anywhere near the level of the Wahoo and Garmin units you'll see on the front of your friends' bikes, it's not going to happen. If you're a Wahoo or a Garmin user, and you've got a unit, say 5 or 10 years old, moving over to a Bryton, whichever model, 530, 450, or even the giant Neos track there, which is the same kind of menu system, you'll find it very different, and I'd highly recommend diving into user experience reviews online of the particular model you're looking at, just to make sure you're going to get what you want. I really do think Bryton need to take a few big leaps forward in regard to the technology they use for their screens, and have a really close look at the user experience and a few of the pain points being reported by, well, me here and also online. I'm not the only one discussing these points. Personally, I encountered way too many small hiccups with this unit, trying to get my head around it, or accidentally saving the file, or not being able to get to the fit files easy, or those developer fields not being set, like the list goes on and on. So if you're getting a bad vibe from this review, yeah, that's how it goes. If anything here, I think it was my own expectations, which might have been set a little bit too high on this unit. The spec sheet looked pretty good, but the execution of a lot of those user functions just really weren't up to par. But look, it's not all bad. I do have a quick fix list right here, aka Dear Bryton. Here's how to fix this and how to fix these to make them a viable option against the Garmin and the Wahoo dominated market. First up, no screen inset. Take it from down, bring it up to the surface, gets rid of the shadow, and really turn up that contrast, boost it so we can see what's on screen. Don't lock out the menus when an activity is in progress. Allow us to calibrate things, allow us to set things. You can get to a shortcut menu, you can change things on the mobile, but even navigation, I couldn't start a navigate. That needs to be looked at and reviewed. The activity stop confirmation prompt doesn't exist. If you hit that button twice, it'll save your file done, and before you know it, you have to start another activity. That got in the way. Boost the CPU power, give this thing a little bit more grunt so you can dive through those maps and through the menus. Keep it at the same price point. That'd be handy. It's at a good price point, I'll give it that. Keep the battery the same, even if you were to drop back to say 25 hours of battery life with a better screen and a faster CPU, I think people would accept that, especially at the price point. Add some more partner integrations, such as activity uploads, navigation, and routes, and a stretch goal being on-unit navigation and detailed maps on here, similar to what we saw the Element and Bolt move to with the Roam offering, but that is a stretch goal. I think if you nail the first few there at the same price point, it'd be a valid option. Anyhow, that's my take on things. As I said, my take on things. If you're after cheap, reliable, and a subset of features offered by the rest, that could be a viable option. People do have these units, people do love them. For me, okay, wrapping this one up for today, that's been my take and my user experience out on the road with the Bryton Rider 450 cycling GPS. The upsides again, killer battery life, good core functionality, and a pretty good price tag. On the flip side of that coin, well, if you've watched this far, you've seen all those. There's a bit of work to be done here, and I think the future could be bright for Bryton. This isn't the future though. Look, let's be honest. Alrighty, if you've liked this one, the video, maybe not the product, hit like on the video. That'd be great. Hit subscribe to support this channel because we'll be back with more soon.